With the COVID, as we see here in 2020, again, as an example, it's person to person. It's being spread person to person. Not everybody who has it, who tests positive for having the presence of COVID in their upper respiratory and their sinuses, gets sick. What this means is we humans are the source for other humans now. Okay, wherever it came from in China, bat, either in the lab or at one of the wet markets, doesn't matter. We are now the source, person to person. They call this being the source, they call this the reservoir. This is where it's going to be found now. Nowadays, for the past 7, 8 decades, 9 decades, when it comes to influenza, the common influenza we see every year, they tell you to get the vaccine for, we are the source. May have started from swine, it may have started from birds back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but we are now the source. We are the reservoir. We are where the source for continued infections is. Other bacteria, other viruses, it could be animals. They call this zoonotic or arthropodic, if depending upon whether or not it's something that's being passed from animal to us or insect to us. When it's us as the reservoir, somebody's sick and they're going to pass it on to you. You know, oh my God, I'm going to get sick too, especially if it's a family member and you're at home. Other times, it's somebody who's just what they call a carrier. That's what we're seeing right now with COVID-19. The vast majority of people, no signs, no symptoms, never even know they have COVID-19 in their sinuses until they get that swab done and tested. They're what they call carriers. They don't get sick. They don't know they have it, but they expose other people to it under certain conditions. Other reservoirs can be, like I said, arthropods, insects. We're constantly getting bitten by flies, mosquitoes, ticks, fleas. All of those have some form of a microbe that can infect them and get passed on to us. There are also non-living reservoirs. Soil, water, air carries microbes around. It doesn't keep the microbes happy, doesn't keep them living or anything, but it's just there if it's air, if it's soil. When we look back at that carrier state, which is a big issue right now with COVID, we have the asymptomatic carriers. This is the vast majority of people. They don't know they have anything. They don't know they're carrying something. It's just there. It's not causing them an infection. It's not causing them a disease. If it is infecting them, it's such at a low level that even their immune system doesn't quite recognize it being there. If it is causing an infection that is now progressing through those stages of infection, people during the incubation period can be shedding viruses, can be shedding bacteria in their exhalations, in their mucus. If it's an STD, they can, they haven't, developed the wart or the canker or the ulcer yet, but they're shedding the viruses, they're shedding the microbe. They're called incubation carriers. At a given enough time, they will start to show symptoms and signs due to the prodromal and the acute phase. Somebody's already gone through the disease, they're feeling better, they're up and about and out in the real world. Well, they haven't quite cleared everything. Their immune systems removed it, but they may still be harboring some of the microbes that they can now share with other people. Chronic carriers, Typhoid Mary, great example. Turns out she, there was the urban legend about her is a little iffy, but she was a chronic carrier of typhoid. She never got sick. That was her explanation, her defense. I've never been sick. I've never had it. She was a carrier who spread it. Her poor hygiene, she was a cook, food she touched, food she prepared, spread it to other people. And then in a clinical setting, especially in the hospitals, you're going to get what's referred to as passive carriers. Okay, this was a big problem in hospitals back during Semmelweis, Lister, and their times. And even then, it progressed as a problem up till probably the last decade, when they've really cracked down on hand washing. You go in, you touch a patient, you check a patient's bandage, you know, a lot of times people just don't, the clinicians, the doctors, the nurses, whatever, didn't think, I'm touching the patient. Well, the patient's been coughing on their hands, wiping it on their gown. Patients, fecal matter, urine has gotten onto all the surfaces, because of, whatever, their, inability to get up, the bedpan spilled, things like that. You don't see the urine, you don't see the fecal matter, but they've been touching stuff. You come, you touch, you go to the next patient, you touch them. You just passed on whatever the first patient just had. A big problem we're looking at nowadays is zoonotic infections. As we are spread out all over the world, we're becoming in contact more and more often with wild animals, domesticated animals. Wild animals and the domesticated animals are exposing us to a lot of stuff. Rabies. Rabies is not something that we are reservoirs for. No, other mammals out there, depending upon where you live in the world, raccoons, skunks, foxes, bats, those are the reservoirs. You get bit by one of those. Yellow fever, mosquitoes, birds, what is it? Bacterial infections, plague. Oh God, yeah, plague. Plague's actually coming back in China. Plague, bubonic plague. What we see here is rodents, fleas on the rodents. Fleas are the reservoir. The rodents are the reservoir. The fleas get a blood meal. Along the way, they pick up the plague bacteria, which then they go and they jump on a human. They bite the human. A couple of weeks later, a couple of days later, humans dying of plague.